Preparing for a podcast interview can seem very intimidating. There's a lot of unanswered questions you may have about how to prepare, how much time you should spend preparing, whether you should prepare at all, and how to avoid the trap of sounding like a robot when you're talking to your interviewee. Now, if you haven't figured it out by now, I'm making this video for podcast hosts, not for guests. My name is Alex Mershak. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called conviviality.ai, which helps podcasters find great guests to interview. And so as a result of this video and my content is going to be focused on people that are hosting shows, that are doing podcasts, who want to get better, want to learn how to do it better, and grow their shows. So, as I said, it's going to depend a lot on what kind of interview you are, how you want your interviews to go. But having conducted over 100 interviews myself across 2 different interview shows, as well as been on a guest on other shows, I know a thing or two about how to conduct an interview and how to prepare for that interview ahead of time. So there's a few core guidelines that I use personally to do my interviews, and I found seem to work. Both from the feedback that I've gotten from my guests as well as from my audience members, as far as how to conduct an interview in such a way so that it doesn't sound overly robotic or scripted, but it also gives appreciation to the fact that I've actually taken the time to prepare and understand my guests and understand the subject matter appropriately. So, to start, I would say that before you actually do the show, and before you have any notes on what you're going to talk about on the show, you want to get all the preparation out ahead of time. What does that mean? Well, that means that if there's an article you need to read, if there's a book that you need to read, if there's any kind of in-depth research that's required for you to do ahead of the show, you want to make sure that that's all done, ideally many days before the show actually is recorded. And there's a few reasons for this. One is that you don't want to be relying too much on a set of predetermined questions going into the show in order to keep the conversation flowing. And the other reason is that you want to give your brain time to process and understand the subject matter or the topic deeply enough so that it becomes second nature to have a conversation about it by the time the day comes around to talk. So the first thing is you don't want to procrastinate on doing the research, doing whatever background investigation you need to do before you actually go and record the show. Ideally, you're not doing this the night before or, God forbid, the day of. After you've gotten that out of the way, I guess the next question is, well, how do I know when to start preparing, right? And what I mean by that is you may be wanting to go ahead and do some research or do the reading or whatever it is before you actually even have the show confirmed, right? Because if you're asking someone to come on your show, maybe they're available right away. Maybe they're available a few days from now, and you want to give yourself time to prepare. So my rule of thumb is that if I'm inviting someone on, before I even send out that first invite, I want to have an idea of how much research, how much background information is going to be required for me to understand and learn before we ever start speaking to each other and before I get a yes or a no from them. And what that means is that if I'm asking an academic to come on to talk about a book or a paper, or if I'm getting a YouTuber or another podcaster to come on, I want to have a rough idea of, okay, if this conversation goes forward, if we end up booking a call, how much time do I think that I'm going to need to get up to speed on their core subject matter before we actually do the call? And obviously for a more academic interest, you might need a longer period of time. For a book, you might need a week or even 2 weeks in order to process that. For someone where you're going to be covering academic papers, maybe you want 3 or 4 days, a week, something like that in order to read those papers and digest them. And then of course, for more casual conversations where it's just a friend or it's just some other content creator, maybe you don't need to have as much research done ahead of time and you can sort of just wing it a little bit more and be more improvisational in terms of your approach. And so you might just want to, catch up on the latest things that they've been doing over a few hours, one night, maybe a couple days or a day or two before the interview. just so that you have some background context. And so the first thing is that whenever you start is going to depend on the amount of depth and the required reading, if there is reading, that is going to be expected going into the interview. That's the first thing. One caveat in this is that I never start the research process before I actually have a confirmed interview. And the reason is because you don't want to go through the time to go read a book or watch a bunch of movies or whatever the research process is going to look like without even knowing that you're going to be doing the interview. Now, obviously, if you're interested enough in the subject that you want to go and do those things on your own anyway, and you would have prepared already regardless, then go ahead and do that. But as a rule for managing your time around the show, and as a host, especially if you don't have a lot of this stuff, like with your scheduling and your posting and these things outsourced, or having some, assistant or someone like that doing it for you, probably you're not yet a full-time podcaster, or even if you are, you're spending a considerable amount of time in the actual production of your show, right? It's not just the hour or 2 hours that you're on camera, it's all the time preparing and doing prospecting and inviting before and after the show, right? And so you want to make sure that you are not wasting your time doing a bunch of research on something that you may or may not actually have a discussion about. Now, the other thing that I would say you want to do is get that information deep into your head as actual knowledge. And there's a few reasons for doing this. The biggest reason why you want to get that inside of your head as kind of embedded knowledge is that you don't want to be stuck in the middle of the interview not knowing what to say next. Or, in my opinion, a worst case scenario, having to overly rely on your notes in order to keep the conversation going. And the best way to avoid getting stuck in this situation is to actually know what you're talking about. Surprise, surprise. But when you actually have a good understanding, an internalized absorption of the information at hand, of the subject matter, whatever it is that you're going to be talking about, then the questions will come naturally to you as the conversation flows. And this, in my opinion, is sort of the sweet spot for where you want to be. You want to be in a situation where you can have a semi-improvised interview with someone where you're not overly reliant on notes, you're not overly reliant on a set of prepared questions, and you have enough context and background information about the subject matter or whatever it is that you're going to be discussing in order to have what sounds like and what really will be a more naturalistic conversation around with two people who have prepared and understand what they're talking about. That's not strictly guided by a script. Now, again, this is going to depend a little bit on your personal philosophy and your approach to making the show. But for myself as host, I like to be in a situation where when I'm getting ready to do a show, right, I've done all the research beforehand. I've taken all the notes that I want to take, and I've ingested all the information deep into my brain before I actually even get close to turning on the camera. And the reason for this is that I don't believe in showing up to a show with a giant list and pages of notes. And a giant list of questions to ask them. Because I think that what that does is it locks you too rigidly into a frame for how you think the conversation is going to go or how the conversation should evolve. And ultimately, the point of having a good conversation, the reason why I name my application Conviviality, is that you want to leave space for serendipity. You want to leave space for unknown avenues or tangents or side conversations to happen inside the context of the larger conversation that you've organized, right? And as a host, you want your subject, the person you're interviewing, to feel as if you're actually having a genuine, real human conversation with them. You should be. You don't want them to feel like they're sitting down in front of someone who already has an agenda, already has a plan, already knows what they're going to say next. Instead, what you want to be doing as much as you can during the actual interview is being as present as possible, leaving as much room to take in what they're actually telling you, and then go to where you naturally find yourself wanting to go. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't have some idea of where you want to go with the interview beforehand. My personal approach to this is that I don't want to seem overly prepared. I don't want to seem overly robotic, but at the same time, I also don't want to seem like I don't know what I'm talking about, or I don't have any idea in terms of how to lead the conversation. Right? As the host, it is your job to facilitate the discussion, to create a container around the conversation that you're having. This person that is giving you their time and vested you with the leadership responsibility for carrying out a good conversation, for producing a show that people are going to find entertaining or informative or whatever it may be. It is your job to take on the initiative in that interaction to guide the conversation, which means that if they don't know what to say next, if they run out of topics, or if things are going in a direction that's slightly awkward or slightly unexpected, that you have to be able to step up and on the fly manage that discussion and keep it both entertaining as well as moving along, right? And what that looks like is not having an overly rigid or overly predefined script to go off of, but also having a general idea, a high level idea of how you want the conversation to unfold. And what this looks like in practice, the actual tactical tip here is that when I'm preparing to do an interview, as I said before, I ingest all the information. I do a giant data dump on my own brain before the conversation. But on the day of the interview, what my notes look like are actually very sparse. There's actually usually only 4, 5, maybe 6 points that I kind of write down in my notes app as touchstones for the discussion, right? That is, I imagine in my head, these are broadly the points that I want to hit, the beats that I want to hit throughout the discussion. And what this allows me to do is have a very unstructured yet still flowing and valuable conversation with my interlocutor, with the person that I'm interviewing, while allowing the space for tangents, allowing the space for serendipity, allowing the space for unexpected avenues in the conversation to veer off in one way or the other. But it still gives me something to return to or to latch onto if we end up, going way off track and then it's unclear where we should go next. Now, of course, depending on who you're talking to, some people are much better at managing conversation themselves as a guest than others. Some people are very good. They've had a lot of different interviews. They know what they want to say going into it. And then other people are going to be more nervous, more unsure what to say. They might not have as much prepared material. And so you're going to need to take more of a guiding role in moving them along through the discussion and getting what you want out of them. And so what I found to be the best sort of middle ground in all of this is to have those 4 or 5 different touch points that I know that I want to hit. And I don't need to hit all of them, right? It doesn't need to be a 100% thing. It could just be an 80% or a 70% even, right? Because again, you want to leave that room, that flexibility for serendipity to come into the conversation. But what that does is it gives us kind of guardrails. It gives us, it's almost like having safety bumpers up when you're bowling, where if the conversation veers off in some strange direction or it gets awkward or they don't seem to know what to say next, I don't need to go, panicking and looking for something to say, right? I know, oh yeah, we talked about this, we talked about that, and then we went off on this other tangent. Oh, the next thing that I want to discuss is this other thing. And the last thing I'll say is that, you never really know where these conversations are going to go. And part of the fun of doing an interview show, part of the joy, the serendipity of all of it is that things are going to come up that are totally unexpected, that you maybe had no idea that they were going to say or that you were going to want to talk about, right? It could be something from them. It could be something from you. But having that lightness, that flexibility, that ability to be nimble in the conversation really allows the space to open up. And that's often when some of the most magical moments happen. And so bringing this back to where we started in the beginning, right? How to prepare, how do I know that I'm doing enough research, et cetera? Again, a lot of it is going to depend on what your format is, what your topic is, how deep you want to go on certain things, and what you're trying to get out of each interview. But broadly speaking, you want to do that data dump so that all the information is internalized inside of you as much as possible. And then during the actual interview, and again, this is my opinion, some people like to have pages and pages of notes. I don't like it because I think it ends up getting too rigid. It ends up locking you into a preconceived idea of how the conversation should go. And I would rather bet on having those magic moments. And I think it's also a skill as well to be able to navigate, to be able to weave the conversation together, to braid different parts together. And that's something that you want to be working on as you do more and more interviews. And so keep the notes, the actual product of all of that research, very minimal. And that to me gives you the best chance of having a wonderful, serendipitous, innovative, convivial conversation. Thank you for watching.